Death is a reality for all people. How do we share the hope of Jesus in the midst of great death and mourning? Death comes to all people. We know this from Hebrews 9:27, that we're all appointed to die once, and then comes judgment. But how do we respond in the midst of death to people that are hurting and suffering? And the first thing that we need to touch on is that the empathy of Jesus. We saw Jesus face earthly death, even from his best friend Lazarus. And John chapter 11 says this: "When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. And he said, 'Where have you laid him?' They said to him, 'Lord, come and see.' Jesus wept." And so we see from this that Jesus saw people that were grieving because a person died, and we know it was Jesus' friend Lazarus. Jesus knew the end of the story, that there would be a resurrection, but still he wept. And so we learn from Jesus, even though we know the end of the story, even though we have a hope, we still need to weep with people. And that's so important, that we don't just give them the answer, but we weep with them. In Romans, it talks about how we need to weep with those who weep, rejoice with those who rejoice, empathize with them. But so often as Christians, we stop there. We listen, we cry with people, we have a shoulder to lean on, but then we don't share with words the hope that we have in Jesus. And so I want to walk you through a way to share this hope of Jesus through the book of John chapter 11, when Jesus was dealing with this grief and people were grieving. And so it starts here in John chapter 11, verse 17. It says, "When Jesus came, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles off, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them concerning their brother. So when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him, but Mary remained seated in the house." And so we see Jesus, who was a best friend of Lazarus. He was healing people, but he didn't heal Lazarus. He not only didn't heal him, but he waited to come in the mourning process until 4 days afterwards. And so there's confusion. Why did he do this? Why didn't he just go right away? Why didn't he heal them? Why did death have the final word? And we see even in the next verse, Martha very concerned and even frustrated about this. It says this in verse 21. "Martha said to Jesus, 'Lord, if you had been there, my brother would not have died.'" And so we see Martha running to Jesus and so confused, even maybe angry, questioning God of why would this happen? And we see this so often in funerals, and especially those that were sudden deaths or deaths that were young. And so we see the questioning of God. And this is a natural human emotion that we shouldn't condemn. It's very real of why would God allow this to happen? Why would death come and have the final word? And we see, though, in Martha's questioning that there's something deeper than just questioning. So read on in verse 22. She says, "But even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you." And in the midst of the questioning, the confusion, even the anger, there was trust. She didn't understand the situation. She didn't know why things were happening, but she trusted the person of Jesus. She trusted the person that she knew, that saw that all the things that he was doing, and said, he's trustworthy. And so there was a level of trust in Jesus. But at the same time, many people don't trust God. They don't believe in God. And so when they're angry and confused and questioning God, there isn't a trust in the person of Jesus because they don't know Jesus. They don't personally know who he is and his nature. And so this is where, though, Jesus, in response to Martha, points to a different way than one might think. A very unique claim. He says this. Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha said to him, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this?" And so she saw that Jesus was pointing to the resurrection, a future what she thought was a future event. And this is what the Jews believed at the time, that there would be a future resurrection on the day of the Lord, that in the future they will have life. And this is true, there will be an event of the resurrection. But notice what Jesus was saying. He wasn't pointing to a future event. And so often we, as humans, we look for the hope in a hard situation. And so people will say, well, we hope that they are in a better place. Or we hope that I'll get through this mourning and I'll be able to muster up the strength to keep on going even though I miss this person so much, or I am so frustrated at this death. But Jesus isn't looking to push people to a future event or a future hope. But notice he's pushing them to a very present hope, the person of Jesus. Jesus said that he is the resurrection and the life. He's not saying a future event, things might get better. Things will, in a lot of ways, get worse because you're missing people, the emptiness inside. But Jesus is saying that he is the resurrection and the life. And so he's not pointing us to be more religious. He's not pointing us to go to church more. He's not pointing us to be a better person in response to death. All those things may come, but he's looking to just have our minds and our eyes, our gaze fixed on Jesus. Not necessarily the mourning and the problem, not necessarily on the solution, but Jesus himself. And notice he says that he is the resurrection and the life. And this is very clearly saying that there is only one way to true life, true resurrection. In John chapter 3, verse 18, it says this. It says, "Whoever believes in him is not condemned, but whoever does not believe is condemned already, because he has not believed in the name of the only Son of God." And so when Jesus is talking about the resurrection and the life, he's not just pointing to people that this is one of the ways to deal with grief, but rather this is a life and death matter, an eternity of heaven or hell. And this is a situation that we need to consider not just as a grieving mechanism, but do we believe this? Do we believe that there is a hell and a God who judges? But do we also believe that God sent his Son to die in our place, to take the wrath of God upon us so that we can have true and lasting life? And notice Jesus at the end of this declaration of that he is the resurrection and the life. He didn't just say, oh, this is the message, but rather he says, do you believe this? And so I ask you, do you believe this? That Jesus is the resurrection and the life? And in the face of mourning and grief, it's not just a message that helps us with comfort and helps us through the grieving process, but this is eternal life. And so we need to share with people not only the empathy of Christ, but that he is the only way to salvation and true and lasting life. And so we need to call people to response of this message and ask them, do you believe this? And notice what Martha responds to this question. She says this back in John chapter 11. She said to him, "Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is coming into the world." And so we see Martha's faith. Did she have all the answers? No. Lazarus wasn't resurrected yet. She didn't understand everything about the death and resurrection of Jesus. But she trusted the person of Jesus. She trusted that Jesus was the resurrection and the life. And so my question to you is, do you believe this? That Jesus is the only way to salvation and life? And as we go through funerals, we need to let people cry on our shoulders. We need to walk through them with life. But are you sharing with them, with words, the hope of Jesus? Are you sharing with them that Jesus is the resurrection and the life? We need to call people to this life-giving person of Jesus. And so as you go to funerals, as you mourn with those who mourn, share with them the hope of Jesus, and you will see people go from death to life. And they will see that death isn't the final word, that life is. And through the resurrection of Jesus, we are confident that death is not the end. Really, it is the beginning of knowing Jesus eternally. And so I encourage you, as you go through these situations, share boldly the hope of Jesus. You have the cure for the disease. You know the victor over the enemy of death. Share the hope of Christ, that he is the resurrection and life. And we know that these things are hard when dealing with grief and funerals. And so we'd love to come alongside you. And so please reach out to us if you have any questions or comments, and we'd love to talk with you and to encourage you to share the hope of Jesus in the midst of much grieving and death. God bless you, and we're praying for you as you go about sharing the hope of Jesus.